So, hello and welcome all for coming today, both in person and to those who are joining us virtually. My name is Michael DeYoung, and I'm the curator and archivist of the Thunder Bay Museum. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the original custodians of this land and to pay respect to the elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and the hopes of Indigenous peoples. We also recognize that we are meeting on the traditional land of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850, and to acknowledge the role of the Métis settlement in the development of our community. A few housekeeping notes. The lecture is being recorded and broadcasted via Zoom. After the lecture, there will be a question and answer session and refreshments served as well. So we welcome you all to stay after that and enjoy the exhibit and conversation. So because this lecture is to some extent serving as an opening for our exhibit on POW art that specifically highlights the work of Georg Hoegel, I would like to say a few words on that before we get into the history of everything. So partnerships have been a key focus for the museum in recent years. They allow different institutions with their own strengths to work together towards a result that each couldn't achieve on their own. In this case, George Romick, Director and Curator of the Thunder Bay Military Museum, approached us with an idea to display a selection of the artwork of Georg Hoegel, which was donated to that museum in 1997, here in a venue that would expand the reach and visibility. For us, the mutual benefit was to not only display and enjoy these artworks, but also to do so in the broader context of interpreting the story of prisoners of war in Northwestern Ontario, and to display other POW artifacts from our collection and several other collections. I'd just like to briefly side note while we're talking about partnerships, just to recognize that George and the Thunder Bay Military Museum also recently partnered with us to contribute a small display at Lakehead University in connection with Indigenous Veterans Day, a partnership we intend to expand on in future years. So returning to POWs, many thanks are owed in the development of this exhibit. Again, thank you to George for proposing this partnership and working hard with us to make it happen. If you haven't been, I definitely recommend a visit to the Thunder Bay Military Museum over at the Park Street Armory, not only because there are many more Hoegel works there to see if his artwork catches your fancy, but also there's many other fascinating displays on Thunder Bay's military history. George, remind me, you're open by appointment in Tuesday, Thursday, 10 to 12?
Correct.
Awesome.
Yeah, we've also got a Facebook site, so if there's other times that you may want to bring a group in, you can message me through there and I'll do the best that I can for the tours.
Great. Thanks are also extended to the family of Georg Hoegel, but I will let George Romick speak more to that. I'd also like to thank Ken and Beth Bogue for generously loaning prisoner of war crafts and photographs from their own personal collections towards this exhibit. Another thank you to Jeff and Susan Mundy. Jeff is a volunteer here at the museum who has assisted extensively in helping us with the research and installation for this exhibit, and Susan for loaning 2 items from their personal collection. And finally, I'd like to briefly recognize our wonderful exhibits team, including Sydney Balluz, our exhibits curator, and Sarah Silvestri, collections curator, and other museum staff who assisted in other ways. So before I turn it over to George, I'm just going to take a few more minutes of your time just to highlight some of the photographs in our collection that show the historical context of where Georg Hoegel worked and painted. I do not want to pretend to be a subject matter expert on 1940s forestry history, although, of course, I've read as much as I could in preparation for this exhibit. Think of this more as just a show and tell from photos from our collection, just to sort of set the stage for what George is going to be talking more about. So I definitely welcome interruptions and additions from those more knowledgeable than myself. So tonight we're primarily talking, Georg Hoegel was, of course, moved all over Canada, but I'm going to focus more specifically on his time in the area northeast of Nipigon, working for Nipigon Lake Timber Company, which was owned and operated by this fellow here, Donald Clark. He's the bigger guy at the left, or an average-sized guy next to a very short guy. And so Donald Clark, like I said, owned and operated Nipigon Lake Timber. After the war in 1956, Donald and his son Donald C. Clark, often referred to as Donald Jr., would purchase Great Lakes Lumber and Shipping, which was previously owned by Eddie Johnson's Pigeon Timber Company. And just to be clear, this is a different company than Great Lakes Paper. It was Don Clark, as I mentioned, who operated Georg Hoegel's POW camp and recognized Hoegel's talents. His portrait by Hoegel is actually displayed in the exhibit just over there. So, to some degree, we can thank Donald Clark for the reason that this collection came into being. Just briefly mention that we do actually have an archival fond from Donald C. Clark, Donald Jr., that has many interesting documents from his own and his father's business interests. Next slide. So that's a lot of wood. So we're talking specifically about the Jackfish River, which features heavily in the artwork of Georg Hoegel. You'll see several paintings mentioning the Jackfish River. I could only find a few photos of it in our collection, but here is one with lumber stacked along the river waiting for spring breakup. Our catalog says 1937 for this photo, so obviously we're a few years before Hoegel, but nonetheless, it's close enough that it definitely gives you a feel for what this looked like, and what our prisoners of war accomplished in a winter's work. Now, I want to be clear for geographical reasons, because I'm kind of big on geography. The Jackfish River should not be confused with the town of Jackfish or Jackfish Bay near present-day Terrace Bay, which is a different thing. This river flows into Lake Superior just east of Nipigon. It's really the first stream of any size east of Nipigon, nor is it to be confused with the more prominent Jack Pine River, the one with the sort of sandy cliffs coming down, which is 2 streams further east. Some of you don't care, but I like geography. I like to know where things are on a map. Next slide. Another one of the Jackfish River. Again, you can just see the staggering amount of wood piled up and waiting for the ice to melt. Quick note, these photos were all taken by E.C. Everett, who was a prolific photographer based in Nipigon. From what I understand, he photographed the area from the 1930s all the way through to the 1970s. So a lot of our historical record of the Nipigon area, this thanks to photographer E.C. Everett. Next slide. This is the best slide. So this is Camp 19, run by Nipigon Lake Timber Company. For several months prior to this, we were here at the museum sort of at a 75, 80% sure this was the camp that Georg Hoegel was at, but we did not know for certain. We were certainly doing some sleuthing, comparing it to some of the paintings, and definitely you can see the similarities in construction. But recently, even within the last week, actually, this was confirmed through correspondence between our volunteer Jeff and Dr. Michael O'Hagan, who was able to find confirmation that Hoegel was at this camp. Now, he was at other camps too, but he was definitely at this camp. So again, this just to sort of set the stage for where Georg Hoegel worked and painted. A brief side note, Dr. O'Hagan wrote his dissertation on the labor aspect of POWs in Canada, specifically the post-1943 shift from POWs in camps to POWs working in lumber camps and others. And it's essential and worthwhile reading if you're interested in this topic. It was very helpful to me in researching and writing. I don't read all of it. It's like 450 pages. I read good chunks of it. His blog, powsincanada.ca, has many other interesting topics on the subject and has a PDF copy of his dissertation. Again, if you're really into this, I highly recommend it. And luckily, I've been communicating with him, and he's agreed to do a virtual webinar on NAYS Camp 100 for us. We're still working out the date, most likely in January, so stay tuned for details on that. But anyways, like I said, you can definitely see the resemblance if you look at some of the paintings between the camps in that George painted and this camp right here. This photo I have dated as circa 1940. So again, slightly pre-POW, but in the ballpark. Next slide. And then this is just one of sort of the end result, so to speak. Of course, this is Donald Clark's lumber being loaded onto ships. The catalog does not say where it was going, and I don't know enough to say. But yeah, this would have been in Nipigon Bay somewhere, again, with the various lumber drives coming out of the rivers flowing into Nipigon Bay. So thank you for humoring me on that. And without further ado, while we switch PowerPoints over, I'd like to formally introduce Captain George Romick, as I mentioned before, Director and Curator of the Thunder Bay Military Museum, who will tell us a little bit more about Georg Hoegel and the story of his fascinating artwork. Welcome, George.
Sarah, slide 1, please. Evening. I am very honored and privileged to be here doing this presentation on Georg Hoegel, as Michael said, and Scott. It's been about, a year and a half, 2 years we've been in partnership on different avenues and stuff like that. My history is I've been in the, as of January 29th, next year, I've been in the military for almost 47 years. And my friend Chris Higgins can vouch for that. And sometimes it's whether it's a dedication or stupidity or a combination of both. I've been doing this for so long, but I like it. I took over the Military Museum back in 2000 on that. And since then, the Military Museum has grown to a very good status of the way it is. We'll start off with Mr. Georg Hoegel was born in Germany in a small town on the Danube River in Bavaria, Germany on 16th of October 1919 as the oldest of 4 boys. Though a good student, he encouraged his teachers to aim for university. The hard economic times of the 30s dictates that after finishing high school in Munich, that he took up a 4-year apprenticeship as a typesetter. Next slide, please. This is a picture of Georg Hoegel when he joined the submariners. Knowing that conscription was around the corner, he opted to join the German Marine voluntarily, as did so in the fall of 1937, receiving training in intelligent message radio systems and U-boat training. Next slide. By October 1938, he went on his first U-boat deployment and continued to go on missions until his career as a U-boat sailor came to a somewhat wet halt in May 1941 when the U-boat he was on, U-110, was attacked by German or Allied depth charges off the coast of Greenland. Yeah, this is a picture that's in the Military Museum's collection. I don't know if that's actually his submarine, but I thought it was an appropriate photograph to show of the corvette or the destroyer coming up to the submarine. Okay, this is a picture of him after he was captured as a POW. Fished out of the water, he was transported via Iceland and Scotland to England on that. And before that, and again, there's a lot of stories I've heard about Georg Hoegel and stuff like that. And one of them, which is very interesting, and it has to do with why eventually he donated the 315 artworks to the Thunder Bay Military Museum, that he got out of the submarine, okay, then all of a sudden, he was the communications guy down where the Migna machine was and looked after all that, is that he went back down into the submarine to get his diary. Okay, came back out, of course, got searched. The Allies figured it was a code book. So after going through the book and everything else, and the Allies said, well, this is just a diary. They actually went and made sure that he got it back. So that was the first step of probably the reason why Georg Hoegel thought so highly of the Canadians and the Allies at that time, that they would take the time to return this diary book back to him. Okay, what I've done in some of the places that I'm going to mention, the POW camps, basically the 24 that are out on display right now are all of Northwestern Ontario. So what I wanted to do in this presentation is that when I mentioned Bury, England, this is where the first POW camp he ended, to show you some of the paintings or drawings or sketchings that he did of those camps. And what I try to do on this, instead of showing a picture of the camp, of showing of the camp commander or flowers or animals, just to show everybody the unique designs he had, basically painting anything that was in front of him. Yes. Fished out of the water, he was transported via Iceland and Scotland to England, Bury, England. That was his first POW camp. To the first of a long series of prisoner of war camps shortly before Christmas 1941. He was transported to Canada as a prisoner of war camp in Monteith. Next slide, please. What's interesting about this slide is on the right-hand side, that's a picture of him painting two bears in an enclosure in Monteith. Within about a month's time, I'm going through documentation that, and this was a postcard, and on the back it says, Nellie and Sally, Monteith, Ontario. So the two bears in his painting are the two bears that are on that postcard. And again, you can see the different paintings that he does. Next one, please. And then from there, after Monteith, he went to Camp Angler, POW camp, which is just outside of Marathon. This is the only photo that I have actually confirmed of Camp Angler that he did there, but he was only there for a short time. There are three other ones that I'll talk to Michael about later on, so we can kind of make sure that they're the right paintings for Angler. I don't want to say this is that, and then I have to come back and sorry, I was wrong on that. Yeah, some months later, he was transferred to a lumber camp. Okay, and again, it says Nipigon, but he was, again, as Michael said in his slideshow, he was at the camp where Don Clark looked after him on that. And you can see what I mean about showing his different avenues of painting, where there's one with a horse, and this is one of the officer's daughters on that. Many of the paintings Mr. Hoegel made of Canadian landscapes date from the time the prisoners worked for the Nipigon Lake Timber Company, whose presidents quickly saw Mr. Hogel's great talent and allowed him to draw and paint rather than cut lumber. When Mr. Hoegel was doing his paintings, his sketchings, his drawings, everything like that, Don Clark seen the potential in this young sailor and actually sponsored him, which basically meant he supplied his paint, his pencils, his sketching material, everything like that, so he could do the paintings that we're seeing today. In October 1944, the prisoners were transferred to a camp near Medicine Hat. And then on to Lethbridge. After a brief stay in Calgary in 1945, Mr. Hoegel was returned to Medicine Hat, where he spent his last few months in a prisoner of war camp in Canada. On the 16th of March, 1946, the trip home began. Mr. Hoegel experienced more prisoner of war camps in England to finally terminate his prison life in Dachau near Munich. On the 27th of February, 1947, Mr. Hoegel was once more a free man. Okay, the next three slides are photos of him in 1997 before he donated his artwork to Thunder Bay Military Museum. The photo credit there I tried to find out who this gentleman was. All I could think of was that he was assigned to take the photographs of all the artwork that was coming over from Germany to Canada at that time. What followed were 5 years of fine art studies in Munich, and soon after the security of a government job in the Bavarian Forest Department, where over until his retirement in 1984, Mr. Hoegel illustrated many books, brochures, theses, made thousands of sketches, graphics, lithographs, not only utilizing his keen eye and sensitive pen and brush, but also his great skill as a calligraphy, where he had been requested to write many state documents. Okay. This is a picture of, this one is of Mr. Hoegel arriving in Thunder Bay in 1998, along with, next slide please, with his wife. They were coming at that time to do the presentation of his 315 artworks to the Thunder Bay Military Museum. Mr. Hoegel, a lifelong dedicated artist of superior skill, has donated the most cherished part of his life's work to the Thunder Bay Military Museum. Throughout his working life, he always managed to put in 4 to 5 hours of painting past his regular workday. What had been informed by me, and I've got a message from his granddaughter, Katerina, was that his grandfather would get up in the morning, have breakfast, walk down to his studio, and basically stay there until it was time to go home for supper. And he basically did this every day on that. He just loved painting, sketching, drawing, and his dedication is unbelievable. He states that this is possible only because of the understanding of his very patient wife, Dora. And I'm sure a lot of the gentlemen in the room can understand that. Whom the war had swept her from her native home to Munich, where they met. Background on the Thunder Bay Military Museum and the Georg Hoegel art collection. The Thunder Bay Military Museum was established in 1992 after being accredited a full military museum. In September 93, after an inspection by the Department of National Defense and the Director of History and Heritage. What happens with that is, because we were inside an armories and we were a military museum, to get accredited to be a D&D museum, a team from Ottawa basically came down to the Thunder Bay Military Museum, did an inspection to make sure that what we had in the museum, that our standards were good enough to be a military museum. On that, the mandate of the Thunder Bay Military Museum is to collect, preserve, catalog, interpret, and display the rich military history and heritage of Northwestern Ontario. That's our mandate. But we do have other items from other units from across Canada, because a lot of soldiers, whether it was the First World War or the Second World War, went off to different units. So when they came back home, they came back home with all their military kit and stuff like that. And they get older, they pass on, the family doesn't know what to do with it. We will take it to the military museum. We will look after it. And we've gotten items from, for example, a gentleman came in, a buddy of his was with the Regina Rifles. Didn't know what to do with the stuff, okay? I took it in, and eventually it went back home to the Regina Rifles. So that's part of our mandate also, to make sure that these items get back to the proper military museum where the gentleman came from. In 1997, the Minister of Northern Development and Mines, Mr. Hodgson, announced funding toward the acquisition of former World War II POW artwork on that. A donation of 315 pieces of artwork had made its way to the Thunder Bay Military Museum, which will prepare the collection for display. Funding was also announced from the Ontario Trillium Foundation to build the present day display case that's at the armories right now. Next slide, please. This is the grand opening of the display of the Hoegel paintings in 1998. That's inside the O'Kelly Armories. Next slide. This is Mr. Hoegel and his wife, Dora. Next slide. And this is some of the artwork that was on display for that opening. Mr. Hoegel was here for probably about a week, touring Thunder Bay on that. Back up, please. Thank you. On that. And during his time there, and Michael had mentioned to me about if I knew anything about him going to different schools or the college and university and stuff like that. And I've got a photo album with me that basically says that Mr. Hoegel went to some of the art classes and showed the students and the people at that time how to paint, on how he painted and stuff like that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, from the 19th to the 31st of May, 1998, the collection of POW artwork was on display at the Thunder Bay Art Galleries. And there's 5 slides on there. So this way, because at that time we did not have the proper display cases up there to hold all this. And plus it also gave a chance for the citizens of Thunder Bay and Northwestern Ontario to view the artwork of Georg Hoegel. Mr. Hoegel decided to give his collection of 315 artwork done during his Prisoner of War years in Canada to the Thunder Bay Military Museum as a way of saying thank you for the humanitarian and kindness he and his comrades experienced, whether they were speaking English, French, or Finnish. He stated that if his works could tell the viewers to concentrate on the beauty of life, despite all the evil that may exist, it will have been a worthwhile lesson. Though the respectful treatment given by Canadian prisoners was the guards. To the German POWs, the prisoners learned of a spirit of humanitarian, which in turn helped them build a better and more dramatic Germany upon their return home. Also, another note is that when they went back to Germany, a lot of the German POWs came back to Canada on that. Prime example is Paul Melgenberg. Again, another submariner. He actually made a scale model of the Angler POW camp where he is at. That's at the Military Museum. He came back and actually got a job in Scriber, okay, working in the sawmill there. And he became a very influential part of the community, being a scout leader on the council and other things like that. And again, it just came in for the gratitude of the way the Canadian Guards treated them during their 4 years in the POW art. Along with the 245 POW artworks that Georg Hoegel did, there were 70 sketches of the post-war Germany. There's 4 here that I brought out. And again, it shows the talent of Mr. Hoegel to be able to draw a person, an animal, a house, a forest, or a creek. Okay. George and Dora Hoegel have 1 son, Reinstead, and 3 lovely grandchildren. Okay. Mr. Hoegel passed away on the 27th of March, 2014. Next slide, please. This is Katarina Hoegel. She is the granddaughter of George Hoegel. I've been in contact with her for about the past 2 years or so because I was looking for more information on her grandfather. Where she is right now and what she's doing is her grandfather, besides the 24 paintings here and the rest that I have at the Thunder Bay Military Museum, painted over 2,000 paintings and sketches. Okay? As much as the family would have loved to keep 2,000 plus paintings, they had nowhere to store them. So what the family has decided to do, and there is a website out there, I just don't have it off the top of my head, is that they're actually selling some of Mr. Hogel's artwork, just so other people can cherish and enjoy his artwork. I have a few words from Katerina. My father always tells me that my grandfather only stopped drawing when he needed to eat or sleep. He did this as long as he was able to draw. That's why we have over 2,000 of his paintings at home. We are trying to sell as many as we can to show that they can be appreciated in the homes of many today. And my grandfather always noted how well he was treated during his time as a POW in Canada. How he was granted the privilege to draw most of his time in the POW camps. I believe that his art helped him to work through his experience in the war. And if he didn't have art as his passion, he would have been a very different man. And that his paintings about his time as a POW are still being appreciated to this day. It would make him very, very happy. When I mentioned to Katerina about this, she was immensely pleased, happy, and honored that between the Thunder Bay Military Museum and the Thunder Bay Museum, that we were displaying her grandfather's paintings for everybody to see. On that. And my final words, again, I'd like to thank Scott, Michael, Sydney, Sarah, and the rest of the Thunder Bay Museum for letting me be a partnership with your organization. Otherwise, these paintings would be seen in the Thunder Bay Military Museum, but I only have limited hours, and being in a military establishment, only access if I'm there and stuff like that. So this way, at least, all you people here tonight can view his 24 paintings he has, and on for the never 7 months?
Mid-May.
Oh, mid-May,
Sure.
On that. So, and again, thank you for listening to my presentation, and I'm hoping that you understood what I was talking about. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Question? Oh,
Yes, ma'am.
Why was he moved around to so many of the POW clubs? Was it his choice?
You know what? I don't really have a good answer. I think it probably because when they had so many prisoner of war or POWs in one camp, they needed to spread it around. Like a camp like Monteith, I think that would probably hold maybe 3,000 or 4,000 POWs. There was Lethbridge, which I believe off the top of my head held 15 to 20,000 POWs on that. So they basically moved them around as they seen fit. There's no real onslaught of why the military or the government does things on that. Yes, ma'am.
Did Don Clark ever meet up with George Hoegel after the war?
but I know, but I'd be interested to know.
You know what? I don't have a good answer for that, but that's one of my research things I will look into.
Yeah.
But I'm almost positive if he was still alive when Mr. Hoegel came to Thunder Bay, that they would have met up on that. Okay, note the file.
We'll look into that in our own.
Yeah, on that. Yes, sir.
I've always read that POWs weren't able to bring their art and crafts back to Germany with him at the end of the war. But he obviously was able to take all his paintings with him.
Yes.
I wonder if that was an exception, or?
Ma'am, you have a,
I know.
Okay.
I talked to George about this because I was involved with Sunday Art. He had to send it all back. He wasn't allowed to take it back. So it was all shipped back to Munich. And he went to the post office in Munich. And of course, the city had been bombed, but the post office was still there. And his work was there.
Wow.
So he was able to get it back.
Was that the government, the military that sent it, or did
I
he
think
have a private?
He had to send it back. He was
Oh, he was able to package it up before he
Yes.
was, okay, thank you.
from England, I believe. But
Okay.
I think he could take it back from her, but he couldn't. I remember him saying he wasn't allowed to take it back. He had to mail it back to himself.
Okay.
in Munich.
ma'am, were you with the art gallery when the
Yes.
paintings? I don't know your names.
Janet Clark,
Oh, Jen, okay.
so that was,
That's a great story, thank you. Yes.
Any other questions? No. Again, the 24 paintings are on display. I do have a photo album of pictures of when Mr. Hoegel was here throughout the whole week, if there's people that want to see it. And over on the mantle there's a lithograph of 5 of his paintings. What the Thunder Bay Military Museum did back in 1998 was had about 300 of those made up. They will be for sale in the gift
Soon.
shop within the next week or so.
Within the next week, just because they just came in, we couldn't get them in our sales system yet, but they'll be available for purchase shortly. I just check back with us, and they'll be available for purchase in our gift shop.
Yeah, and I'll be around if anybody else has any other questions or points they'd like to ask. Oh, Scott, sorry.
We do have a question from online. Is it possible to repeat any other questions near the microphone before answering the next question?
Oh, sorry. Nothing else? Oh, geez, nice crowd. I figured I'd be baffled with questions than that. On that.
Are you aware that his workmates, like, was there a complicated dynamic with the way that he painted and they worked? How did that work? Are you aware that he said anything about that?
No, he didn't on that, but I don't think, from my understanding, that there was any resentment that he worked and he painted. Most of the POW camps, and I think this is why the Germans like the I have a voice, so it does travel. Why the German POWs enjoyed being in Canada, because if you know, like anybody else, if you're not doing anything, your mind wanders and you're going to get into trouble. So through the Red Cross or the POW camps or the military, they provided the German POWs a chance to learn how to speak English, get up with their studies of either math, English, geography, and history, and also to make items. Like Michael has said, and Mr. and Mrs. Burrow, is it? Well, Bulk, sorry. And also with the military museum, have artifacts that the German POWs made. And this kept them busy and thinking on their own and stuff like that, instead of getting into trouble on that. And then also, as you've seen in some of the pictures, they were given instruments. So they played in orchestras to keep themselves busy during their time in the POW camps on that. Scott?
George, do you have any, or is there any information about how he acquired all the supplies? Were the officers bringing this in? Or was he making stuff on his own?
Well, my understanding, and through some of the information I have, is that a lot of the stuff was through the Red Cross on that. The Red Cross would supply a lot of the pens and papers and stuff like that for their reading material, for their academics and stuff like that. And I'm sure that once the Red Cross learned of Mr. Hoegel and his artwork, they supplied them as much as possible. And again, like I said earlier, Don Clark, through the logging company, bought him his artwork, his pencils, easels, and stuff like that to continue on his doing his art. Yes, Doc.
We had a dentist from Thunder Bay that served as a dentist at Mays for 5 years. That's Dr. Cecil Schaefer. I'm not really sure that Cecil would be smuggling things through. Cecil was a great guy, and we look forward to meeting this chap and looking after I was going to say inmates, but actually prisoners.
Yes. Yeah. And there was also a lot of friendships that were made between the POWs and the guards. Again, another story, I can't confirm it, is that when POWs worked for Don Clark, they would actually get paid. They get paid so much for cord of wood, and basically once a month, they were driven into Nipigon. Gentlemen, you have 4 hours. Okay? Go off, spend your money on what you want on that, and then back on the trucks. There was never any escape attempts. Everybody got back on the truck and went back out to the logging camp. So this is the trust that the German POWs had with the Canadian Guards on that. Again, this is an interesting story that I had heard. Scott?
Another comment from Dr. David Ratz. He wanted to let those attending know that the POWs were also allowed to use the money they earned cutting timber to buy things, including their own art supplies.
Yes, yeah. And Dr. Ratz is an associate of mine with the Thunder Bay Military Museum, so he also has a wealth of great knowledge. Thank you, Dr. Ratz. I can say that now.
Dr. Ratz also had a second comment. The image earlier was of U-110, the submarine, and is likely the HMS Bulldog towing it after capture.
Okay. Thanks, David, on that. Yes, ma'am.
George, how long was he in the Northwestern Ontario camps as compared to the other times? And did that influence why he donated to you and not Medicine Hat, or that's good part?
I think most of his time was in Northwestern Ontario on that. And that's where the majority of his paintings are from, Northwestern Ontario on that. And again, it would be because of Mr. Clark befriending him and helping him out with his painting and stuff like that, and the well treatment of the Canadians toward Mr. Hoegel. And again, like I said earlier, is that when he was captured off the submarine and he went back to get his diary, okay, the Allies thinking it was code book, they made the effort to make sure that he got his diary back. So that's where the trust came from. And like I said earlier, the majority of his paintings were in Northwestern Ontario. He wanted to come back to the Thunder Bay Military Museum. Scott?
George, I know he's a prolific artist. Was there anything else that he did with his time after the war?
Oh, yes. Excuse me for a minute. I got a book in my... Mr. Hoegel, during his after the war and that, did up a number of books, and this one is the U-boat emblems of all the different U-boats that were in the Second World War on that. And my understanding, he's done a number of these books on naval emblems and items like that. So this book will be around if anybody wishes to look at it. That's it.
Do you know, did he teach art at all?
Well, I know when he probably did, and the reason I say that, again, I'll bring out the photo album later on, and it shows him being in Thunder Bay at some of the high schools or the college, showing the art students how he painted or sketched using paints, pastels, pencil, and so forth on that. So I'm sure that he didn't keep his talent to himself. He wanted to make sure other people also learned how to draw and sketch like he did. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, he worked for the government in the forestry program. I think you mentioned after the war.
Just let me check my notes. Yes, on that. And then eventually he was requested to write many of the state documents.
I was just wondering if he was a cartographer or did anything like that in his forestry career. The museum has all the Krakow for paintings, and he did maps for Great Lakes paper. And I just was curious if Hogel's career went the same way with mapping.
You know what? I don't know, to tell you the truth on that, but that's another thing you can look into. Yeah, there's a wealth of information in the Thunder Bay Military Museum that I'm still going through on Mr. Hoegel on that. So again, I apologize if my answers aren't as precise as you would like on that. Anybody else? Sir?
It's not a question, just a suggestion, is that as this comes a little tighter and is put together, it might be something that the museum would consider taking on the road to other historical societies. Because I recognize this as a gem that's
Yes.
sitting here in Thunder Bay, that there's a lot of folks interested in military, prisoners of war and things like that. And you've got a unique collection here that would be of interest to other museums and other historical societies across Canada. And I'm only saying that it could either be done by virtual presentations as a package, or it could be sometime somebody sending out a memo saying, is anyone interested in getting a grant and taking it on the road a bit? So it's just a suggestion. I don't mean all the artifacts, but the presentation.
Oh, no, the presentation is not a problem.
Right. I just meant the presentation
Yeah.
itself.
Oh, okay, no, I thought you were talking about the artwork.
No, the artwork stays where it is. You bring people here to
Well, I was asked, I believe, by the Nippigan Museum to bring one or two of my paintings there. So again, don't quote me on this, but depending on which museum or museum society within Northwestern Ontario, if it's an easy drive, I can look into something like that on that. But for the presentation, yeah, I can definitely do something like that virtually.
I'd like to, yeah.
Oh.
Carol, you, me?
I was going to ask a question. You don't by any chance know whether any of his work might be in the museum in Nippigan, do you?
No, there isn't.
Sure.
No, because I was there, I believe it was 2018 after I came back from a tour of the battlefields of Vimy Ridge and stuff like that, because the Legion wanted me to do a presentation on my trip and also do a display on the from the military museum. And I went down there and no, they don't have anything there. Because they were the ones that asked me if I could loan them one of the paintings. And it was, how do I say this nicely? I've never done anything like this before, so it's not that I don't trust the museum, but this is one of a kind artwork. Like, if the artwork goes, I'm going with it. And then when we're done for the day, it's coming back with me home on that. Unless it's a well-known museum. For example, the Museum of the Regiments in Calgary. I know the curator there very well. And before I took over, he requested some of Georg Hoegel's paintings because they were doing a German sports theme during the First and Second World War. A museum like that, or the Canadian War Museum, I would probably consider, yes, those paintings going there because of the stature of those museums, because they would pay for the shipping, the insurance, everything else to get those items there and then back afterwards. Does that answer your question, ma'am? Sir, did you have a question?
Yeah, Brian Davis, Marilyn and I are with the Red Rock Historical Society. And as some of you may know, Red Rock was home to an internment camp. They didn't call it a POW camp. It was Camp R, a very short-lived life. But I'd like to follow up on the suggestion of having traveling George bring his collection down to the Red Rock Marina Interpretive Center, beautiful building. And we do have a prisoner of war internment camp R displayed there with ships and bottles and carved battleships and things like that. For your information, if you were a history buff. And then George, we could tie in a presentation because we have a slideshow and collection of camp R's in history in Red Rock.
Yeah, no, we can definitely look into a traveling George Roadshow like that. Sorry?
It's your retirement coming to life.
Yeah, I just won't tell the wife.
All right. Well, thank you again to everyone for attending. Thank you, George, for coming and presenting this. Thank you again for partnering with us to make this happen. We're really excited to have these wonderful artworks in our collection, or not in our collection, in our exhibit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Don't get excited.
Yeah. And thank you to the Lakehead University Department of History for continually sponsoring our lecture series. A few more things before I let you go. If you'll forgive me a shameless plug for our gift shop, but expecting some interest thanks to this exhibit, we've ordered a fresh batch of the book, The Little Third Reich on Lake Superior, Red Rock Internment Camp R, as Brian was talking about, by Ernest Robert Zimmerman, edited by Drs. Michel Beaulieu and David Ratz. If that is of interest to you, it's available downstairs. A few upcoming events to highlight. A week today, Tuesday the 29th, Dr. Ulla Seitsonen, 2022-2023 Chair of Finnish Studies at Lakehead University, will be presenting here on contemporary archaeological research on the material heritage of Finnish Canadian immigrants and on retracing the footsteps of Finnish archaeological pioneer Sakari Palsi, who traveled across Canada in 1927. On the afternoon of Sunday, December 4, filmmaker Jim Hyder will be presenting a making of talk on the film In Search of Wendell Beckwith and highlighting some fascinating material that did not make the final film. For both of these events, please register via our website or just give us a call to be added to the list. So thank you again, and please enjoy refreshments and conversation and enjoy the exhibit. The artworks are protected by glass, but still we request that you keep the coffee in this room. Thank you all and enjoy your evening.